Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning into our Thursday evening polling roundup. So we're going to be going through the latest opinion polls for the next UK general election, which will of course be held on Thursday the 4th of July. These polls were released yesterday, actually there's 3 of them we're going to go through, have a look at those, and I shall get on with that for you in a second. Just say that if you're enjoying the content on the channel at the moment, please like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to tell your friends about what we're doing on this channel, our polling roundups, our opinion polling videos leading up to the next UK general election. And thank you so much everybody for giving that. Drop a comment, let me know what you think about this and all of our videos and content. Thank you so much everybody. Today was Dissolution Day, I believe, so we are now in the campaign proper. Once you get dissolution out of the way, then you can say that you are, properly in the general election campaign. So here we go, five weeks today, isn't it? But we'll all be going off to the polls. We'll all be polling. Right, okay, so let's have a look at these opinion polls then. The first one to get on the table is Savanta. Just here. That was released yesterday for the Telegraph, but it was actually conducted between the 24th and 26th of May, so that's a slightly older poll compared to the other two we're going to be looking at. So Savanta gave the Conservatives 27% of the vote, Labour were on 44%, Liberal Democrats were on 10%. Let me make sure I've got the columns right, so don't want to get any mistakes at this important juncture. I've got to make sure everybody gets fair hearing. SNP were on 3%, Greens were on 4%, and Reform were on 8%. A little bit lower than we see in some of the polls for Reform, and consequently slightly higher than we see for the Conservatives. Now, how does that compare with the previous Savanta poll? Let's try and find it. So that was down here, I believe, from the 17th to the 19th of May. That's right, isn't it? Just making sure. Yep. So in that poll, the Conservatives were on 26%. So in the latest Savanta poll, the Conservatives were up 1. Labour in the previous Savanta poll were on 43%. So Labour was also up 1. Liberal Democrats unchanged on 10%. SNP unchanged in the latest poll to previous Savanta poll on 3%. Greens on the previous Savanta poll were on 5%, so they're down 1 at 4%. And Reform were down 1 as well on the previous Savanta poll. They was at 9%, and now they are at 8%. The overall Labour lead on the previous Savanta poll was 17% and remains at 17% because both the Conservatives and Labour went up 1. So the overall lead for Labour there is unchanged. Right, let's have a look at the other two then. So we had a YouGov poll for Sky News, which created quite a few headlines, and then we had a More in Common poll. Let's deal with YouGov first of all. I say this created quite a big stir. Sky News created quite a lot of headlines out of this. So, as ever, YouGov, one of the worst pollsters, one of the worst polls for the Conservatives. They have the Conservatives down at just 20%, which is absolutely catastrophic. If they polled that in the general election, that would be... well, that would be really catastrophic for the Conservatives, let's put it that way. They found Labour on 47%, which is overall a 27% Labour lead. Absolutely enormous Labour lead there. 10 points up on what Savanta found. And they have the Liberal Democrats on 9%, SNP on 3%, Greens on 7%, rather higher than the Greens. So just because normally you would lower the Greens and give it to Labour, but that's quite a high Green total, and yet Labour is still managing to get 47% of the vote, even with the Greens on 7%. So if you took a couple of percentage points off the Greens and gave it to Labour, as what you'd expect happened during a general election, then, Labour getting close to 50% there, say if you took 3% off the Greens and gave back to Labour. So, absolutely incredible poll, really, this for Labour. And YouGov also found reform on 12% in this particular opinion poll. So how does that compare to the previous YouGov poll? That was down here, YouGov for the Times. And in that poll, they have the Conservatives on 22%. So in the latest YouGov poll, the Conservatives are down to. Labour were on 44%. In the previous YouGov poll, we're on 47, down to Labour, up 3. Conservative down to Labour, up 3. Liberal Democrats unchanged from the previous YouGov poll, 9%. SNP 3% unchanged as well. Greens were on 6% in the previous poll, so they've gone up 1, interestingly, and Reform were down 2. Reform were on 14. Previous YouGov poll, and they are now on 12%. Others also going up in this poll, so others on 3%, whereas before in the last YouGov poll they were on 1%. So overall Labour lead of 27%. In the previous YouGov poll, Labour had a lead of 22%. So quite a significant increase in Labour's overall lead over the Conservative Party there. Very, very, very grim poll, that one, for the Conservatives. You would say catastrophic if that occurred in a general election. Be talking about the Conservatives facing more or less complete wipeout. That would be getting towards Canada 1993 type levels. And then the last poll we had yesterday was more in common. So that one had the Conservatives on 26%, rather higher. Well, quite significantly higher than YouGov had. Labour were on 45%. Liberal Democrats were on 9%, SNP 2%, Greens on 5%, and Reform on 11%. How does that compare with previous more in common poll? Let's try and find it. It's just there. And in that poll, the Conservatives were on 27%, so the Conservatives are down 1 in the latest more in common poll. Labour also up 1. So before they was on 44%, now we're on 45%. So Conservatives down 1, Labour up 1. No change to Liberal Democrats, 9% in both polls. SNP went down 1 in the latest poll, so they're on 2%. They was on 3%. No change for the Greens on 5%. And Reform going up 1. They were on 10% in the previous more in common poll. They are now on 11% in the most recent more in common poll. The Labour lead with more in common on the previous poll was 17%. It is now 19%. So Labour's lead going up by a couple of percentage points there. All the changes there within margin for error. The YouGov poll, the changes are a little bit more significant. Still just about within the margin for error, but the YouGov poll does show, particularly the 3% rise in the Labour score. Quite a significant movement there. 3% is still just about within margin for error. But yeah, these are very grim polls for the Conservatives. I think the Conservatives by now would have been hoping for some sort of signs of a narrowing, particularly like getting some votes from Reform. They would have been hoping to see a bit of a Reform to Conservative switch. There's absolutely no sign of that whatsoever, and Labour's lead, is very steady in the mid-40s, or their share is very steady in mid-40s%. Whether, their overall lead is in the upper teens or below 20s or the mid-20s, it does vary. When it does vary from poll to poll. But, I think the Conservatives will be particularly alarmed at that YouGov poll. They won't want to be seeing too many polls showing up, like 26, 27, 27% Labour leads at this juncture. They will be hoping, will have been hoping, see signs of a narrowing So there's absolutely no sign of that whatsoever. So we wait to see what the next batch of polls has to say. There may be some polls coming up this evening for tomorrow's media outlets, tomorrow's papers. If there are, then we'll do a polling roundup tomorrow. Otherwise, the next polling roundup will be on Saturday. You always get a clutch of polls being released on Saturday evenings during the general election. They're always, Saturday evenings are always very exciting for us polling geeks and anoraks, during the general election. You should always get lots of them turning up. So we shall see. Anyway, keep checking back to the channel for more, and obviously we'll keep you updated. Oh, better show the polling graph, haven't I, before we go? Really forgot to do that, just so you can see how that's looking. So there it is. That is the latest polling graph. Labour are ticking up, which I think a lot of people would be quite surprised about. Most people would have been expecting, I think, given Labour started from such a high level, they would have been expecting to see their trend line starting to tick down. There's no sign of Labour's trend line ticking down. Conservatives, flat as a pancake, really. They're not going up or down. They're just staying at that very low level in the mid-20s. And Reform, which this line just here, well, they have dropped since April. It looks like they're steadying that now. It looks like the drop at the moment is beginning to level off. No sign of Reform lifting up, but it looks like the drop in the Reform trend line has sort of levelled off and steadied. Other parties, Liberal Democrats, Greens and SNP through here, not really showing any particular change. So the movement really is with Labour's trend line, which is continuing to lift up slightly. Right, okay, so that's it then. If you enjoyed this polling roundup for this Thursday evening, please like, share, subscribe, thanks so much for doing that, and we'll be back with more polling data for the 2024 UK general election very, very soon. But that's all for now, and thanks for watching.